Welcome back to MADMAN Review. In this video, we'll explore the challenging decision many people face when they are confronted with an armed robbery. The video delves into the topic of whether compliance or resistance is the best option in such a situation. The topic of compliance versus resistance when being held at gunpoint is not often discussed because it is a sensitive and complex issue that can be highly emotional and traumatic. For many people, the thought of being confronted with an armed criminal is frightening, and the prospect of having to make a split-second decision can be overwhelming. As a result, many people may avoid discussing the topic altogether, or may simply rely on common sense or intuition in such a situation. Additionally, there may be a concern that discussing resistance may encourage people to act recklessly, putting themselves and others at risk of harm. On the other hand, discussing compliance may perpetuate a culture of victim blaming where individuals are expected to comply with the demands of criminals regardless of the circumstances. Moreover, there may be a reluctance to discuss the topic because of the potential legal implications of resisting or complying with an armed robber. Laws may vary from state to state, county to county, and city to city, and it can be difficult to provide definitive guidance on what actions are legal and what actions are not. This can make it challenging for experts to offer concrete advice on how to respond in such a scenario, which can further complicate the discussion. For these reasons, we'll limit the scope of this video to gun-friendly states, one of which is Texas. Speaking of Texas, just a couple weeks ago in southeast Houston, Texas, a gas station was raided by 4 masked robbers. It appears that during the robbery, some individuals attempted to hold up a customer who happened to be carrying a concealed firearm inside the convenience store, so they were met with resistance. The customer opened fire, hitting 3 of the robbers, but unfortunately, an innocent bystander was also caught in the crossfire and sustained injuries. According to the Houston Police Department, 5 individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 arrived at the gas station, with 4 of them entering the building while the remaining person stayed behind in the car. Reportedly, the 4 suspects who entered the store with masks on began threatening customers at gunpoint, demanding their belongings.
At this point in the investigation, we're not quite sure if the gunfire came from the suspect or from the citizen who fired upon the suspects.
The good guy with a gun who was present in the store drew his own firearm and fired at the suspects, resulting in 3 out of the 4 suspects being shot. The customer was unharmed during the incident. Again, the gunfight resulted in injuries to 3 of the suspects and, unfortunately, an innocent bystander. It was a 46-year-old man who was unarmed. He was taken to the hospital and was reported to be in stable condition shortly after being hospitalized. It was never made clear whether the bystander sustained injuries from the suspects or the good guy with a gun. 1 out of the 3 injured suspects, age 18, was taken to the hospital in critical condition, and the other 2, ages 15 and 17, are stable. Police took into custody the 5th suspect, who was waiting outside. Taking on a single armed robber is already a daunting task for any civilian, let alone confronting 4 of them, and very few individuals would dare to do so. I give props to our defensive shooter in that Houston robbery, but I digress. Now, I know a few friends who do not support the use of firearms. One of them, a real progressivist, leftist, liberal, has been a proud victim of armed robbery on multiple occasions and believes that his decision to not carry a gun saved his life. He thinks that cooperating with robbers is a safer approach rather than attempting to act like a hero and putting oneself in harm's way. I have to disagree with his rhetoric, and I'm sure you would too, but feel free to comment on the matter down below. How people normally react when being robbed at gunpoint. When it comes to being robbed at gunpoint, people tend to fall into one of 3 categories: the always compliers, the conditional compliers, and those who will never comply. The always compliers adopt a strategic approach, believing that if they comply with the criminal's demands, they will not be harmed. On the other hand, the conditional compliers are more opportunistic and are prepared to comply until they identify a chance to turn the tables on the criminal. This could involve pulling out their own gun and shooting or fighting back once specific conditions are met. As for those who will never comply, they take being robbed as a personal affront, viewing it as a greater insult than death itself. These individuals are willing to put their lives on the line rather than surrender to the criminal. In the case of my friend, he's the first type, an always complier, preferring to comply with the criminal's demands to ensure his safety. However, the defensive shooter in the Houston robbery takes a more tactical approach, as a conditional complier. Rather than immediately using his firearm, he waited for the right opportunity to present itself before taking action. When the suspects entered the store, the conditional complier was ready and the tables were turned. The criminals were caught off guard and were unable to carry out their plans. Now, some left-leaning individuals argued that if the victim had simply complied with the criminal's demands, the bystander would not have been shot. I think that's BS. It was the criminal's decision to rob people that created the situation that allowed the bystander to be shot in the first place. In other words, if the criminals had not initiated the robbery, the situation where an innocent bystander was injured would never have occurred. Why you shouldn't comply if you're robbed at gunpoint. There are numerous instances where criminals have shot people even when they have complied with their demands. Here's one. It's a common piece of advice to comply with an armed robber if you find yourself at gunpoint, but this advice is not always the best course of action. There are several reasons why you shouldn't comply if you find yourself in this situation. First and foremost, complying with a criminal's demands does not guarantee your safety. There have been countless cases where victims have complied and still ended up being hurt or killed by the criminal. By complying, you are putting your life in the hands of someone who has already demonstrated a willingness to use violence. Furthermore, by complying, you are enabling the criminal to continue their behavior. If more people refuse to comply, the criminal would have less power and may be deterred from continuing to commit these crimes. Lastly, it's important to consider the long-term consequences of complying. By giving the criminal what they want, you are reinforcing their behavior and maybe inadvertently putting others at risk. It's important to take a stand and send a message that this type of behavior will not be tolerated. Of course, it would be a lot different if you were not carrying a defensive handgun with you. Here are a few tips on what you can do if you ever find yourself at gunpoint. While the automatic response would be to do whatever the bad guy with the gun tells you to do, there are a few things to consider. Number 1. Stay calm. Maintaining clarity of thought is vital. Panicking will only escalate the situation and cause the bad guy with a gun to feel more threatened and potentially react more violently. Despite the person with a gun having control over the victim's physical movement, staying calm will give you a psychological advantage. It will allow for you to think rationally and logically, enabling you to use rhetoric and persuasion that can potentially de-escalate the situation. By staying calm, you can also remain aware of your surroundings and gather information that could be helpful in the future. Additionally, by remaining calm, you may be able to identify any opportunities to escape or gain control of the situation. While compliance may be necessary in some situations, it's important to assess what's happening and use your best judgment. By staying calm and level-headed, you may be able to influence the outcome and increase your chances of staying safe. Number 2. Establish eye contact. Although it may seem overly simplistic, making eye contact with a bad guy holding the gun can be a powerful tool in this situation. Assuming this person isn't a psychopath, you can force them to recognize your humanity, even if only to themselves. While you don't want to make the person feel completely out of control, you do want to make them feel uncomfortable. Establishing eye contact creates a general discomfort that may cause the person to start reevaluating the necessity of their actions and begin searching for a way out of the situation. Making eye contact can also help to establish a human connection between you and the person with a gun, which may cause them to feel less inclined to harm you. It's important to note that making eye contact alone may not be enough to de-escalate the situation. There may be other factors at play. However, by making the person with a gun uncomfortable and acknowledging your humanity, you may be able to influence the outcome of the situation and increase your chances of staying safe. Number 3. Know your attacker. It's important to remember that there are specific situations where a gunpoint is more likely to occur, such as during a robbery, hostage situation, or kidnapping. No matter the context, the primary objective of the person holding the gun is usually not to kill you. After all, if they wanted you dead, they won't even talk to you. You'd already be 6 feet under before you know it. In most cases, time is on your side. Every second that passes is another opportunity for things to de-escalate. Take your time to observe the person holding the gun. Try to identify unique features that could help distinguish them from others. Rather than trying to remember exact details such as height and weight or specific articles of clothing, focus on identifying distinguishing characteristics. Unless the person has exceptionally distinctive physical traits, providing vague descriptions such as around 6 feet tall or approximately 150 pounds won't be of much help to law enforcement. Clothing descriptions are also often unhelpful, as a person may discard their clothes after the incident. Number 4. Telegraph your actions before you do them. Try telegraphing your actions before you do them. Verbalize what you're doing as you're doing it, and move at a slow and deliberate pace. Retrieving your wallet or purse should be a carefully choreographed dance, not a frantic scramble. Think of it like an elaborate heist movie. You need to be smooth, deliberate, and in control. So, take a deep breath, channel your inner Ocean's 11, and execute your moves with precision. Of course, all of this assumes that the bad guy is just after your wallet. If they're demanding something more sinister, like a hostage situation, a kidnapping, or worse, if you're a woman, a rape, the rules might be a bit different. But, in general, slow and steady helps you avoid getting shot. Number 5. Stay as quiet as possible. Never scream during a gunpoint situation, as it can escalate the stress levels of both you and the assailant, which could lead to dangerous outcomes. Instead, it's advisable to remain as quiet as possible and minimize talking. This can help keep the assailant calm, especially if they have their finger on the trigger. It's essential to recognize that no two gunpoint situations are the same, and each scenario will be dynamic and unpredictable. It's important to stay calm and comply with the assailant's demands as much as possible. Additionally, be aware of your surroundings and do what you can to ensure your survival. Number 6. Prevent gunpoint from happening. Let's face it, the best way to avoid being held at gunpoint is to steer clear of any situation that could lead to one. And if you're out and about, try to avoid going solo, especially if you've had a few too many cocktails. Criminals who rely on guns are usually the cowards of the underworld, using weapons as a crutch to make up for their lack of courage. If you're with a couple of buddies, it adds too many unknown to their plans. But if you're flying solo, the bad guys might think they have the upper hand, and that's no good for anyone. So bring a friend or two, or at least walk in well-lit areas to prevent gunpoint from happening. If you're a lady, comfort is key. You never know when you might need to sprint away from danger, so leave those high heels at home. Also, flaunting your wealth is like inviting robbers to a buffet. If you don't look like you're carrying a stash of cash and diamonds, the bad guys are less likely to target you. After all, is a $10 watch worth a lengthy stint in the slammer? And lastly, don't forget to be aware of your surroundings. If you look like you're on high alert, potential attackers will think twice before making a move. Keep your head up and your eyes open, and you'll be one step ahead of the game.